Welcome to another episode of the Mind Like Books podcast. Today, we're here to finally discuss one of the most famous Czech books, Czech sci-fi classics, R.U.R. by Karel Capek from 1920. And I'm so excited to talk to a very special guest whose nickname is R.U.R. And he has so many things to mention about him that I don't even know where to start. How many titles do you have to your name?
No, I just master and PhD.
So you're a researcher in computational linguistics.
Yes.
And coincidentally, my cousin. So I'd like to introduce Ruda.
Hi.
First time on a podcast, probably. Have you ever been on a podcast before?
Yeah, once actually.
What was the podcast about?
It was Czech Science Cafe.
Oh.
And they normally do like talk shows, but during COVID they switched to podcasts temporarily.
I've watched that. Yeah, that's pretty cool.
Yeah. So this was so it was fun. We couldn't back then meet inside, so this podcast was recorded outside. So we walked around in a park and recorded.
So, of course, inevitably, there's going to be some AI language model discussion, but I'd like to put that off as long as possible, because this is about books. I'd like to talk about books. But to introduce a little bit more, I have to say that you speak a lot of languages, and you're, of course, really good at programming, and I was really happy when I remember a long time ago you announced that you want to combine your two best skills and focus on computational linguistics.
Yeah, that's it. But somehow the development in the field is more towards like machine learning and artificial intelligence and less about the knowledge of language. So it's still useful to know language, but it's more the computational than the linguistics.
That was actually exactly my question, and trying really hard not to start this discussion about AI, but how much is that relevant anymore? Is the problem of translating languages and analyzing text basically solved now, or is that something you still research?
Yeah, so we still research it, but like in machine translation, there already are results where machine translation quality can surpass even professional translators for some languages.
Yeah.
So in a sense, it seems like, that's solved. In another sense, like we are kind of beginning to have it solved. So we can translate very well something like news text from German to English because there is loads of data for that. But for translating specialized text or translating books for the sake, like that's still hard. Like you can translate a book and you will understand what the book is about, but we have focused very much on the meaning. If you imagine news text, so what did happen? What is a news text about? So we are great at capturing the main message, but if it's more like art, say literature, some fiction literature, so it's not so much about an information that you want to pass to the reader, but it's more broad, and there are other stuff, and that's it. This is hard to capture because we don't even know how to measure it. Like, okay, so we're now dealing with poetry. So we have this poem, and okay, what does the poem express? That's very multifaceted, and it's about feelings. It's about the context you are in, the author was in, and whatever. Yeah. So it's not in the text. So when it's written in the text, that's easy. But when it's these external things, that's still hard, or it's hard for people, and it's at the moment probably impossible for machines.
Yeah, I can imagine. You've been very close to the development of computational linguistics. I remember first you told me about GPT, like at the time it was an open company, changed a lot since then.
Yeah.
And I remember
but it's not very open anymore.
Exactly. And at the time you started working with it, it was GPT-1 or 1.5, I remember?
GPT-2, yeah.
GPT-2, yeah.
Like nobody heard about GPT-1, like it exists, but yeah.
I remember you were super excited and you were trying to explain to me what's the difference. And I remember like you were super excited about all this language processing. So I'm sure you will not admit this, but I am also sure that you have played some role in the language development, like understanding languages with language models. I don't know, you have contributed directly to OpenAI, but I'm sure there has been some contribution that you've done.
Yeah, well, I could hope. It's hard to know. So nothing I would know of. But then again, like these big language models now, they are mostly closed source in some commercial companies. So we don't really know what they're doing and how they're doing. So we know in general, but we don't know exactly. So.
Yeah, but to finally get to my segue and to your super cool project, to wrap this all around, I really enjoyed your project, Robot Writes a Play.
Yeah.
So I'll just let you talk about it. I think that's better.
Yeah, okay,
what is that?
So that's nice because it binds nicely actually to the R.U.R. book because it's so as you mentioned, it's a book from 1920, which means recently there was a 100-year anniversary of the book coming out and of the word robot appearing, which appeared in the book first time. And so we actually had a project so the main initial push was actually this centenary of R.U.R. and let's celebrate it somehow. Mm-hmm. And so the idea was not to spoil too much, but probably that's no big secret that R.U.R. text written by a human about robots.
If that's a spoiler, then I don't know what is a spoiler.
So we try to turn it around and let's say, okay, 100 years later, can a robot write a play about humans? And this was the initial idea of the endeavor. Mm-hmm. And then it was like, okay, so what can we do with robots? Well, not much because like robots are not the main technology now. So language models are the main technology, but they're not like robots. They don't have like hands and so on. So we still have this funny video where we programmed a robot to actually type on a typewriter, like that.
I've seen that.
The actual script, but of course, like that's not what's happening. And we even had huge discussions, like, okay, so should we even show this video because it gives the false impression that this is how the language models work. There are some robots somewhere typing on typewriters. So no, they're not. But so anyway, so the idea turns to, okay, so can artificial intelligence generate a theater play script that would be possible to perform in a theater? And so it was a project of computational linguistics, but also of theater experts. And then we hacked and tuned GPT-2 at this time to actually produce a script, and the result was really a 60-minute theater play that they actually rehearsed and performed in the theater, and 90% of the script was generated automatically. So this was an achievement at the time. So it was a long.
It's awesome.
And generated automatically to a large extent, and really it made it into the theater, and some people came to see it and they didn't
some people
of the play, so it was like
I think it was really popular. It was all over Czech television, and you've done many interviews, and I think it kickstarted your name in the field a little bit, like you.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah. So
constantly you're giving speeches and having interviews, and you're being a guest in places, and
like this famous podcast.
This is like the least of any of that, but thank you so much for
top of my career.
It's very nice of you to say, but we all know that that's not true. However, I'm very happy for you that you're doing so well for yourself, and it's awesome that this project came to fruition, that it was actually entertaining. I was super skeptical because at the time it was 2020, so ChatGPT wasn't a thing, nobody cared. And generating something out of nothing basically was kind of frowned upon. I know there were some sci-fi movies that were completely generated, like scripts for sci-fi movies. And there's a famous movie we talked about how they generated the script and then they reenacted the script with actors. It's complete rubbish, to be honest. I couldn't make sense of anything. At the time, I remember I watched that because you told me there was a plan to make this theater play. And I watched the movie and I was like, oh no, this is going bad.
This was where we were at the start of the project. So it was a lot of fun. Like, we didn't know if it would work, but we were like, yeah, we can generate something. So we were sure we can generate like individual sentences. We weren't sure if we can generate like a paragraph of text. And then we ended up generating like a full script, so that was cool.
It was surprisingly fun,
Mm.
like unexpectedly funny. I watched it with Jen. She's been on the podcast many times, and she was very skeptical, but we had like a very good laugh many times. There were some very surprising lines.
I'm happy about that. So yeah, I think it turned out really good, and part of it was that it was during COVID, and so the theaters were closed. So the directors, the actors, the dramaturgists, they basically didn't have anything to do because, you couldn't meet, you couldn't rehearse, you couldn't play. So they turned up having much more time for the project than they originally thought. So they invested a lot of time in the rehearsing, in like interpreting the script, in designing costumes, designing music, stage design, whatever. This actually helped a lot. Like the script, I think the script is still like half rubbish, but they managed to act around the script to like pretend it makes sense, even though it may be at some point. So
there was a beginning and an end. There were acts, and it went somewhere, and there was some kind of character arc. So I didn't expect that. So one last question about that before we start about the book. Are there any plans, or do you wish you'd make another theater play or anything along those lines?
We're not sure where we would go with the theater play. So obviously, if we would use today's like GPT-4, so some of the problems we had would disappear. But it's like, it doesn't seem like to be an interesting challenge at the moment. Like, okay, we know it's possible to generate a theater play script, and it could be better if we did it today. But before it was like, can we even generate a script for a 1 hour play that we can actually act out? And it wasn't sure whether it's possible or not. And now we kind of are lacking this big question, like this intriguing thing that we would like to figure out. So unless we get an idea of something cool efficiently, then probably not. But so we have another project where we now generating poetry. So that's
I heard about it.
And this is still hard. Like if you ask ChatGPT to generate a poem in English, it's kind of doable. Maybe good, maybe bad, but it looks like a poem at least. If you ask in Czech language, it just very superficially looks like a poem in the sense that it has some lines which are short, but it doesn't rhyme. It doesn't have any rhythm. It's some rubbish in all sorts. So that's the like current challenge where this is something interesting where we don't know what's possible and what's not. So
I see.
So I'm a researcher, so I'm always trying to find like problems where we don't know the answer at the beginning. Like, will it be possible? How will it turn out? So that's like where it's interesting.
I have so many questions about that, and I have so many things I'd like to talk about, but I'm sure you have been asked about this to death, so I'll just not do it. And let's save it until the end, maybe a little bit. Let's talk about the book. And this has been one of your favorite books, I think.
Yeah.
How many times have you read it?
I don't know. It's quite short, so I read it like 3-4 times, I think.
I keep saying books. It's a theater play.
Yeah, it's a theater play. So I actually never saw the theater play as a play, which I still have on my to-do list or bucket list or whatever list. And I heard they're probably performing it in Prague this year, so I hope to see it finally as a theater play. Because
you have to do that.
Like in principle, it's a theater play, so probably you should see it as a play and not read it as a book. But on the other hand, like it's weird. Like it's not a classical theater play. So when we talked to the theater experts, they said, well, it's kind of it is in dialogues, but it's a lot of talking and not much acting, and it's maybe partially philosophical rather than dramatical. So they said that like Capek has a lot of works. Some of it are theater plays, and some of it are not. And they said they probably prefer to act out things that were not written as a theater play than R.U.R, which kind of is a theater play, but they said it's kind of a philosophical text disguised as a theater play or something.
It's not that philosophical. But
I wouldn't say it's completely that, but there is some kind of direction there. It's actually one of the first books by Capek, so one of his first books, and so I think maybe he tries to do several things at once. So write about his interesting ideas, but also about write a theater play and also whatever. So it's maybe combines several things together.
And I have to say, it succeeded on all fronts. I was very entertained, and I didn't remember it as much. And every time I revisit it, it's very, very nice. Feels very fresh somehow, out of time. Like there isn't doesn't feel dated at all.
Yeah.
It's 70 pages, and it's very dystopian. I didn't remember it being this bleak.
Well, it depends on how you interpret the ending. That's like you can interpret it that it ends in a good way or in a bad way, and this is a bit open. I think it's probably ends in a bad way, but this depends. But it's definitely a dystopian thing.
I was wishing it would be much longer. I think he probably would have had a lot to say if he wrote this as I don't know, in modern times it would be like a series of movies and series of books, and it would have 700 entries in a TV show. And I'm kind of sad that this is all, because it had a lot of interesting things to say, and especially for 1920.
Yeah, I completely agree. It's like very condensed in a quite short thing, and it has a lot and has been influential a lot actually, and like it's surprising that it's so short. I agree.
Yeah, exactly. I have to say, we still haven't mentioned Karel Capek is one of the most famous Czech writers, and he's famous in the world for the word robot, for not only making up the word, but not making up the word, using the word in that context, and also creating robot characters. I've done a little bit of research, and I checked that before 1920 there were only a few mentions of anything resembling a robot or like an android in literature. This isn't a quiz, but do you know about this?
Yeah. So well, there is definitely like the Frankenstein, which is older. And that's like the most well-known example of an artificial human. If we are talking about the Czech or Prague context, there is the golem, which is also
I want to say
artificial creature. So that probably even comes from some biblical things. I'm not sure, but so there have been artificial creatures, artificial humanoid creatures before. Yeah, and it turns out there wasn't a good name for them. And I've seen a few more, but I don't remember those.
There's something called TikTok, unfortunately. TikTok from 1907. It's the same writer who wrote The Wizard of Oz. I'm not sure the name now, but he made like a robotic creature that's gears, like a clock gears. One of them turning one of the gears make the robot think. The other gear, when it turns, makes the robot move, and the last one makes it speak. Maybe it's like a wizardly, robotic mechanical thing, but it's mostly like a puppet. But it's self-aware, and before that, all of the other characters were just puppets. And I was trying to look up Isaac Asimov, of course, but he was born when this came out, so so clearly he wasn't first with the robot stuff. And Karel Capek took the word robot from robota, which in Czech and many other languages means just work or very hard labor. That's
and of course, when we were saying this, so we should mention that there is like anecdotal evidence that actually it wasn't Karel Capek who invented the word, but actually his brother, which
Josef Capek, yes.
Yeah. Who was also a writer, but also a painter and stuff. But the only evidence we have is actually a story written by these brothers about how it came to be. So we don't have like any historical proof. It's just Karel Capek said that his brother invented the word. So that's how we say it.
Yeah.
But anyway, it was one of these two probably.
Makes me very sad because Josef Capek was an artist, writer, painter. There was also a sister, I'm not sure her name now, but she was also like a theater actress.
Well, Helena.
Yes, thank you.
Yeah, as the main character in R.U.R, so that's the same.
And Karel Capek has one of the most depressing endings to his life I've ever heard about. Every time I read about it, I'm like, oh my god, so sad. I don't even know we should talk about this as much, but he lived only 48 years, and he was born in 1890 and died in 1938. So he had to live through all the wars and all the turmoil and at the end of his life, there's like a thing I always find, and I'm not sure how true this is, but apparently his house got flooded, and then he got pneumonia, and he got sick, and the Gestapo was trying to get him, and he was like, quote unquote, enemy of the state #1, and his wife got sick, and everybody, oh my god. So, just died of losing the will to live almost. Because of all these problems.
Yeah, it wasn't happy times to live, and I think he was a very, sensitive person in a sense, like sensitive to values of humanity and things like that. And
exactly.
This was really hard time for such a person, I guess.
And he could have escaped. I read some notes that he was offered exile. He could have left and moved to England, but because he was so active politically and he was trying to kind of hold Czechoslovakia together and just support, Czech people and protect the state and have a voice against all the bad stuff that was happening at the time. He just wanted to stay, and then all the bad things went down, and it was so sad. I think it's one of those like unfortunate things that happened during the war, and so sad that he couldn't see the end of the war. And so let's not talk about it so much so we don't depressed, and let's look at the actual book. Before we talk about the plot, I think we can both say we recommend it. It's super short.
Yeah, you can definitely read it in one afternoon, no problem. Although it depends on your style of reading. There are definitely a lot of interesting thoughts. So when I read it, I definitely, at many points, I like to stop for a while and just think about what I have just read. And this thinking can take a long time, of course. But really to read it, that's this short.
If you want to take it in strides and have some time to think about it, it works really well with that. If you want to just go in one go, have it done, it's also super simple. So highly recommend it if you want to look at some history. It doesn't feel old at all. It's really easy to read. And I tried listening to an audiobook, both English and Czech. In Czech, it was really nice. Like the voice actor is really good. In English as well, there are many, many adaptations. And so highly recommend it for some history of sci-fi.
So I read it in Czech language. So you can see that the language is a bit dated. But the contents, that's super current, I would say, even more maybe with what currently I see with the development of artificial intelligence. I did see many parallels that this 100-year-old book talks about, and I think, okay, that's actually the problems that we're kind of dealing with today.
Exactly.
So,
I'm kind of amazed that based on his background and the situation at the time, he even had kind of the mental space to think about these things. I was imagining it to be much more, not on the nose, but much more simple, but it actually has some depth and trying to say something. So I didn't remember that.
So I guess you can read it in the context of when it was written, so the end of the First World War, and you can see that in a sense, but I think what Capek manages to do, not only in this book, but in other books that I've read by Capek. So even though he probably comes from what's currently happening around him and what bothers him in the current world, so he can kind of see deeper, and he can see the general principles that govern what's happening. And so the general principles, they are the same 100 years later, so it manifests a bit differently, but he sees, okay, people are actually like that, and people have been like that all the time and are still like that. So they have all the flaws that people have, they're greedy and lazy and stupid and all these things. And this kind of doesn't change. Yeah. So I guess he just builds the plots about the depth of people. And of course, these are the negative things, but then there are also the good people who have the positive traits and But this probably doesn't change. So I guess this is why the works are still current or relevant today.
So if you want to read this and you don't want to be spoiled, stop now, come back when you've read it. Or I guess if you just listen to us, it's not going to ruin it completely. But there are some surprises in the story I didn't remember. So if you're curious, don't listen to the next part. And you can check out the episode notes, there's always a timestamp. If you want to skip to our inevitable AI discussion at the end and not be spoiled still, you can click on that. So let's talk about the plot, and anything that comes to mind you'd like to talk about, please do. Very short recap. I think there are 3 acts. Sometimes it's divided into 4 acts. If that's correct.
Yeah, so in the version I read, so there is a prologue, 3 acts, and an epilogue. Okay. Yeah, but I don't know. It's probably divided.
That's fine. Yeah. Whichever it is. There are not many characters, which is how I like my books, because I'm not confused.
Mm-hmm. There's still a few too many for me. But
oh, really? You should be on this podcast more often.
Because there's several of these engineers, and I'm always confused who is who, because what the team is like, I don't know, 6 different people in the management of the company, and
they're not so important.
Yeah, a few of them are interchangeable, but yeah. But yeah, and that's a good thing about the theater play. Usually theater plays don't have that many characters because you have to pay the actors and actually fit them on the stage. So that's good.
Mm-hmm. So in the prologue, we learn about the background of Rossum's universal robots. How do you pronounce Rossum? Is it Rossum's? Rossum's? How do you pronounce it?
I don't know. Like in Czech, I would say Rossum.
Oh yeah, but I didn't think about it at all. Oh my god. So Rossum in Czech means the smarts, intelligence, something like that.
Yeah, let's say intelligence maybe. Yeah.
That completely makes sense. Oh my god, so dumb. Okay.
But in the book, it's just the name of the inventor of the robot. Mm-hmm. So it's just like accidental that, that's his name. But like you have a very clever inventor who is called Intelligence. Wow.
Okay. So the story starts with the old Rossum. They never say their first names, I don't think. Maybe.
I think not, yeah.
So the old guy was a marine biologist, and he started like a research facility, not really a factory, on an island. And he was researching basically artificial life, and his purpose was to prove or try if people can create life. And he discovers a way to make artificial kind of tissue or matter or blood and bones and things like that. And his purpose was to make animals and just life in general and see if that would be possible. But his son, the young Rossum, he just wants money. So that's already, never not true. It's always the guy who wants to do the research, and then the other guy wants to sell it. So he takes over, and he kind of denies the old Rossum to have any deciding power and just takes over the factory. And he has a wonderful idea. Let's make robots. So I was surprised the robots are completely biological. There isn't any technical, mechanical, anything. It's all biological matter, right?
Yeah. Like that's something special about Capek's robots, that they are actually not an exact copy, but like an analogy of the like real life, and the invention behind it is actually the invention of artificially creating the real life. So they're still made in factories, but in the factories create these living beings, really.
And I thought this wasn't in the book or the theater play, and maybe I just flew past me because I didn't care when I read it at school. But it's super interesting how they describe the manufacturing process. So they have a liver machine and a brain machine and a bone machine and everything. I really liked the sentiment that they have to massage it together and mush it together a little bit to move around it. And if it comes together well, then the robot grows a little bit. So they have them first constructed, and then they close them in a room, and they have to make them move around a bit. So the organs and bones and matter settle inside the body, which sounds super graphic. I didn't like that imagination very much.
Yeah.
But makes sense.
But it's like, it makes much more sense than what we do. Like you have to break in the machine. So when a human is born, it also takes some time before everything works well in your body. So I think that's a good idea.
Immediately there was something super original to me when I was reading this, because I was trying to remember. I read a lot of sci-fi. I watched too many sci-fi movies, and I'm very much into robots, aliens, artificial intelligence, all this. I don't remember a single story where they described organs being used as machine parts or constructing a machine out of artificial organs or anything along those lines. The only thing I could think of was a recent movie called Crimes of the Future, where they had an artist grow organs as an art form. They had like a bunch of weird stuff grow in the body and have them as tools, which was a very gory and disgusting movie. I really enjoyed. I recommend it to people who don't mind gore. But
okay. So like you want a hammer, so you don't create a hammer, but you grow a bone in the shape of a hammer or something like that.
That doesn't happen in the movie, but it's kind of implied a little bit. To sum it up, the premise is that there are so many microplastics and like plastic in the world that the human body started changing that we could digest plastic, and people are experimenting with growing different organs to process different things so we can adapt to all the plastic and stuff like that. So not to spoil the movie.
Okay.
It was very strange,
Cool.
very artsy fartsy, but I liked it.
Yeah, but it's interesting that like we in mainstream sci-fi, like we didn't go this way. Like, okay, so R.U.R. kicked it into this direction, and like genetic research and stuff that's already pretty old. So like we don't see much in this direction. Like, okay, so we could artificially create DNA for whatever we want to grow. We could probably even do it nowadays. Like the research is going in the direction, but like the sci-fi, it didn't really follow this path much.
Exactly.
So it was more mechanical afterwards.
Which is very fascinating to me, and also worrying that like the technology to clone has been around for years and years, and I almost fear it's happening somewhere, all this, but we don't know. Do you feel like that sometimes?
I don't know. I haven't thought about it this way, but of course, like if you're really good at simulating the biological systems, then probably nobody can tell the difference. So yeah.
Like only genetic engineering and cloning people and having organs grown to be replaced or whatever, I feel like that has to have happened already, but it's just not public because of the ethical problems.
Yeah.
So it's kind of concerning every time I start thinking about it. But anyway, in this story, they create these robots, and then after they move them around in this room, they tell them that they have perfect memory and they can recall anything they tell them. So they read them books to like teach them things. And there is a very funny line. So there's a character, Helena. She comes to the island as a reporter, and she tries to interview the owner. And they have this conversation about the robots, and she keeps asking about it. And they get on the subject of consciousness or soul, or what does it mean? Can the robots think for themselves? And the owner or the creator or the engineers, they talk about it, and they explain that they read them all these books and they can remember it perfectly, but they will never have their own idea, and they will never have anything like new or fun to say. They would be the perfect university professors. So I remember that was a good line. So you're a university professor, so not to offend you, but do you feel like you're a robot sometimes in the classroom?
Well, I hope not, but you would have to ask the students.
Do you feel like you're always repeating everything the same and you never have anything interesting to say?
Well, it definitely can happen.
I had to ask you that because I immediately thought of you when I read that line. I was like, so it's some sick burns for the professors around the world. So what did you think about the soul discussion? They mentioned that they can't have a soul.
Yeah, that's an interesting thing to ask, because we're coming back to it nowadays often when we had the project where we generated the theater play. So we asked the dramaturgs, the actors, like, what do you think about the play written by the machine? And they were like, yeah, it's kind of good, kind of bad. We don't like it that much. And they kind of came to describing what it lacks is that, well, the generated text, it has no soul.
Yeah, I've heard that.
And they are not even like religious people or anything. So it's maybe if you're religious, then the concept of soul is more important, but they're not. It's just something which we probably use as this bit that is the difference between the artificial and the real living thing. So even though like it can be technically identical, so we kind of feel there is a difference, and we probably cannot describe it well, we probably cannot measure it well, but somehow it is there, and somehow this is us, this is people, this feels living, and this is artificial, this is a machine. So it feels different. So we say it doesn't have the soul.
I've heard that. So that's, very interesting point. I've heard opinions that the soul or the character, because it can mean so many things. So to some people, the soul just means it has a very distinct character. So there is like a personality behind it, and you can feel the artist's influence or point of view, or you can have some kind of error. So if you have a perfect system, like a perfect language model, let's say, and they write the perfect play, it's gonna be very dry. And by dry, we mean usually no error. Like if you think about it, like there's no noise, there's nothing unnecessary, there isn't anything, there isn't any message or agenda, there isn't anything trying to be suggested, there isn't any style, it's just straightforward. So could the soul be just the errors?
That's nice. So the soul is the error. So like the ideal human wouldn't have errors, but would not have soul because that's the errors. So
I kept thinking about this while I was reading this, because a lot of stuff we as people enjoy is the kind of imperfections. Like if you fall in love, usually what you really like enjoy about the partner is the imperfections. You can see the very specific style of humor, or you can see the very specific like quirky things that don't make any sense, and you just do them on purpose just to be funny, or just to have a connection, or just to have a more distinct character, which none of those things make any sense outside of having fun, like kind of enjoying life and being in a relationship or in a community. So once you erase that, then that's the soul gone, is how I see it, kind of. Because there isn't any community of people.
Okay, so it would mean that when you're born, your soul is really huge, and then through the education system and the society, we actually like beat the soul out of you, and then
that's what some people say. It's not so far from some artists I've heard. Like, do you feel like that, or do you agree with that?
Well, I don't know what the soul is, so like this can be it. Like definitely not all errors are soul. Like when we had GPT to generate the theater play script, it had a lot of errors, but people wouldn't say that this is the soul because it has errors. So you cannot like go the other way around.
Okay.
But
that's a good point. That's a good point. Touché.
Just making errors doesn't help you with having soul. But the other way, maybe it is the errors, or maybe it's just what you see. So the soul is something that pushes you to make the errors. Might be.
Yeah, it's interesting. Definitely super thought-provoking theater play or book. So Helena comes over and she has this discussion, and she talks to the engineers. I'm not sure if I skipped anything important, but basically the owner of the factory, Mr. Rossum, he basically forces her to marry him, which was a little bit surprising. I didn't remember that.
Yeah, it's super weird. Like the play, like it's important when you read it to realize that most of the things are kind of happening in real time. So the opening, it's not like they meet and they talk and eventually they marry. Like no, in like 20 minutes after meeting, he just proposes to her, and that's like very, very weird. And
it didn't come off as creepy, but it was very strange.
He comes as creepy to me. Definitely.
Oh, okay. So not as creepy as you would think, but yeah.
Like he's this big businessman with a huge ego, and he just decides he wants to marry her, and I don't know.
If this wasn't a story from 1920s that I already knew, I would almost be sure at the time that Helena always has been a robot, because then they make Helena robots based on her appearance, and it looked like the conversation at the beginning was Rossum trying to beat into Helena's head that she is not a robot. like almost trying to somehow manipulate her into believing in herself that robots are different and she is not dead, and that's why she's gonna be the new perfect robot. It was like a completely obvious like a movie twist that didn't happen. Did you feel that she was kind of a robotic character the whole time?
Yeah, I didn't feel that, but like but I see it differently. Like I see it as in this part, I probably see the work as being 100 years old, where there are all these important men who are the clever ones who deal with stuff, and then there is this lady who is just always told, of course, no, you're too stupid and you don't understand, and we're doing the important stuff. So. I would say that, if you see her portrayed as a sort of a robot, I would say maybe that's like what the portrayal of the society, or maybe even a criticism of the society back then, like that women are like more of the robot people who kind of just do stuff and cannot decide anything themselves. So
true.
Yeah. So she's this kind of character there, but I didn't think of that as portraying her as a robot, but maybe you can see it this way.
Because her emotions were so painfully obvious that I felt like they were trying to manufacture the emotions in her or something. It felt to me like he was trying to make her shocked just to prove that robots can be shocked but of course that's not the point. But anyway. We skipped that she also mistakes some servants who are robots for people because they look exactly like people.
Yeah, and the other way around as well. So she mistakes some of the engineers for robots.
It was good. Very clever, very ahead of its time, I think.
Yeah. So, like, even before Turing, you have this kind of Turing test determining who's the machine and who's the person.
Exactly.
And they are in the situation where, at least for Helena, it's really hard to tell the humans and robots apart. So, which is fun.
So the first part ends with creepy Rossum basically forcing Helena to stay and be his wife, and then jump 10 years forward, I think, to the next act.
Yeah.
And we kind of have a recap about what happened in the world. So, of course, robots were mass-produced. Everybody wants robots. People are working less and less. And people are kind of losing any meaning or anything to do.
Yeah.
So all those stereotypical dystopian problems happen.
Which is interesting. Like this also, I don't know if like nowadays it's a thought that we talk about. I don't know back then, like the idea that people are kind of trying to get rid of work. Well, of hard work initially, but then you're trying to avoid doing any work at all, ideally. So we are gradually trying to replace the work by some machines or automation or whatever. But then it voices the idea that, okay, but when you don't do any work, so then you kind of lose purpose, so that work actually gives you purpose in your life.
Exactly.
And then people kind of get lost without having anything to do. So... and you have these utopistic visions where, okay, we get rid of all the work so then we can create art and play and recite poetry and I don't know what, dance a lot. And this is like the optimistic view of what happens when people get rid of work. And then you have the dystopic vision, which is already here, like you get rid of work, but then you lose your purpose in life, and then you're just clueless, wandering around and don't know what to do.
Absolutely. There is definitely the ideal notion that the things you like to do will not be replaced, but the things you don't will be replaced. But that's the ideal motivation. But the actual motivation for money and gain means that you will replace anything you can replace, which is happening now.
Yeah.
And instead of having robots do our dishes so we can write more music, we're doing the dishes and the robots are writing the music, like, you know?
Yeah, exactly.
So it's messed up.
Yeah, that's really the joke of current times. And I really enjoy the joke a lot, but I don't know what to do about it, like, because that's true. We are replacing the things that we want to do. And,
I have to quote Dune and do a Dune reference. For Ruda, he doesn't know we have a Dune reference with almost every episode on this podcast because we love Dune so much. And it says, I think, the most relevant quote, it says, "Thou shalt not make a machine to counterfeit a human mind." And I think that's absolutely true. Like, if you build machines to replace us in the same way we work. So surprise, it's replaced. Like, like if you, if you build a machine to not counterfeit or replace or like do something in contradiction to us, but to support us and do stuff that we need to do instead of the stuff we like, then it would be a different story. But nobody thinks about that. Everybody thinks only about, money. So can you make money with this?
So I'm also doing some lectures on artificial intelligence, and I often like to give the people some fields like what could artificial intelligence do in future, like write poetry, write literature, or govern the city, or I don't know, play professional football or whatever. And it's like thought-provoking, but it looks like a technical question, like, okay, what's possible for machines to do? But it's not a technical question. Currently, I think there are no real technical limits that we would see for sure that we cannot have machine do this or we cannot have machines to do that. We thought about a lot of things that machines will never do this and that, and now we have the machines doing that. So we don't see a clear boundary at the moment. So it's more like, I don't know, philosophical, sociological question, like what do we want machines to do and what do we want to keep as humans doing? And this is like the way we need to make the decisions. So far, it's mostly the technical people in charge of developing the new automation systems. But for us as technical people, like, okay, we see it's possible to automate it, so let's automate it.
Yeah.
Now, it's not the only way to go. And this is exactly what R.U.R shows. Like the company, it's run by engineers. There is no like humanity, no humanities people in operating the company.
Yeah, so they don't care. They just want to do their job.
The economists. So we want to do whatever is possible and make a lot of money. But that's not the challenge we have with automation. So there is also the challenge that we have to think, do we want to automate this or not? Like this thought is definitely not there, not present.
Absolutely. And I think even the engineers would stop at some point. Like they would have a moment to consider, the consequences. But there is always somebody in charge, like Mr. Rossum, who doesn't care about anything else but the profits and the production.
But the typical engineers, I don't know if they have a place to stop. Like you see occasional people at some point saying, no, okay, I don't want to go forward in this direction anymore. But I think these are the exceptions. It's not the standard. So
okay, I guess you're right. Maybe scientists, like the researchers, they see the bigger picture, but the engineers, they just implement the thing, so they don't care.
Yeah. So it's like there are these known dystopian things like the I forgot whose idea is it, but it's the paperclip dystopy where so the idea is, okay, so you have this machine which is I don't know, intelligent, and you ask it to generate paperclips because you have a paperclip factory, and the only goal of the machine is to generate as many paperclips as possible. So then it just consumes the whole earth and turns everything into paperclips because that's the only goal. But some engineers, I like that, like the goal of the engineer is, okay, let's make this machine as good as possible. So they're improving the machines and that's their goal, but they're maybe not thinking about other things.
Yeah, so hopefully some people will see reason. I don't know, it sounds so bleak. But it's exactly what this story is about. So basically everybody has robots and people are disappearing because for unknown reasons they don't go into birth rates just plummeted, and they don't say that nobody has children anymore, but kind of nobody, I guess. And Helena is very upset about it.
And I guess the idea is like that the people, when they don't have any purpose, so why have children if like there is no reason to do anything?
I was thinking about that, if they decided to not have children or if they couldn't. And there is like a religious question asked, because Helena is living there and she has a servant who's a person, I think, Nana. Is she a robot or is she a person? I wasn't sure.
I think she's a person. I think she's definitely a person.
I definitely she's a person, but again, I thought that maybe she's like a hidden robot in disguise. She seemed like another experiment that was trying to have very blatantly obvious expressions and feelings. But she keeps blaming God or people that God forbade them from having children because of what they've done. And that's why. So Helena gets super upset and she burns the original manuscript with the secrets of how to develop artificial blood and artificial tissue and how to build the robots, basically. Because she wants to put an end to it. Super upset. So that's the end of the other part, I think. Right?
I think so, yeah.
So then we skip again to the next act about, I don't know, just a few years maybe? Or maybe 10 years ago?
I think this all happens in one day.
One day, oh, never mind.
Yeah, I think its main story is everything in one day, actually, because it looks like it's a few years, but I think it's actually one day, because I think they say now it's the 10-year anniversary of Helena coming to the factory. And I think it starts with this, and they're kind of celebrating this anniversary, or at least pretending to celebrate it throughout the main body of the play, I think. So that's part of what I find interesting, that it's kind of real time, this part, I guess.
Yeah, so the next part, basically robots are everywhere. They started eliminating people because they are useless, and the robots feel abused and all the stereotypical things you can imagine about all the recent sci-fi stories. So basically robot uprisings happening. They are just not attacking, but just waiting around the island, I guess. And they don't want to speak to anybody, do they? They just kind of watch them.
Yeah. It's like this is for me, like this is where I can feel like the terrifying thing happening, where there is this scene where the people are kind of trapped in the headquarters of the factory, and then there are like these thousands or millions of robots around, just staring and being very silent. And I
was very curious about their clothes or tools or vehicles or ships, or they never mentioned anything, because I was interested in, would they be more utilitarian? Would they be wearing no clothes? I don't know. So I was expecting something that they would change.
Based on some photos from the theater play, so the actors are wearing clothes, but
it's very much to interpretation, I guess.
But yeah, I guess no, I don't think there was anything special, because they were really made as a, well, not a perfect copy, but like humans. So I think the idea was they would just use human tools and human clothes and everything. So there wasn't like it's, or sort of like there is the idea that the robots figure out that they're actually better than humans, so kind of superhuman or transhuman something, but it doesn't seem like they're super different from humans. So they just don't have some of human imperfections, but they're still like very humanoid, I guess.
So they have an electric fence around the island, and if the robots touch it, they electrocute them and they completely melt them. One person runs to the gate to check on them, and then he's also melted alive, I think. And then we have this dramatic action scene where the robots break through and they kill everybody. I can't imagine this in the theater play. I cannot imagine what happened in the theater play. Where is the fence? Where is the island? Where are the people? Where is the crowd of robots? I can't imagine what's happening.
Yeah, but I think that's like based on my collaboration with the theater. So I think you just see the inside of the headquarters, and the people are just looking out of the window and saying, okay, there is defense, and let's switch on the electricity and stuff. But I think you would be disappointed that you probably wouldn't see the actual killing of the robots and stuff.
I was imagining some fake cameras with painted crowds of robots, and they would point at them as if it was a window, or I don't know. But
yeah, probably nowadays you would, like 100 years ago you wouldn't, but nowadays.
By the way, the photos from the original theater play are awesome. Have you seen the photos from 1920?
Yeah.
So that's great. So the robots spare one person, Alquist, I think is his name.
Yeah.
Everybody else kind of freaks out. They have a discussion about this boat they could escape on, but obviously they can't. And not sure we forgot to mention something important. Basically, no human spared, and it seems like Alquist is the last human alive.
That's cool. And it all happens probably very fast and very efficiently, of course, because robots are very efficient. So at some point where they organize and they decide that, okay, this is the way to go. So they obey these orders and they just kill everybody, not thinking about anything twice. And
so they mentioned somewhere, I don't remember who said it or why, but maybe the person, the leading robot, or which I also wasn't clear if they have a leader or if they just work in unison. But he mentions they spared Alquist because he is an engineer who can build things and he's good with his hands, so he can work well. Do you remember that?
Yeah. It's some fun reason. Like they basically say, you're as a robot, so we can keep you, and you will be a sort of robot, but a human actually.
So does that mean they spared other people as well somewhere?
Well, they explicitly say that not. So this is really weird. Like that they decide to spare this one human, and the explanation doesn't make sense. So it's sort of again a play of who's a human and who's a robot. So suddenly you have this human, but they just say, yeah, he's sort of a robot, so let's keep him.
Yeah, I see.
But I don't I find this a bit weird. It doesn't naturally flow in the story for me.
It's very exactly, but there needs to be a reason for him to keep him alive, so they can have the last act. But I couldn't think of any better reason. So there has to be some reason. So yeah, Act 4 or 3. So the last one is a bunch of years later this time, maybe 30 years.
Yeah.
So Alquist is an old guy and he's being forced to research robot development, and he's trying to crack the secret and be able to manufacture robots again, but it's impossible because the secret has been lost, burnt in the original papers.
So this is somehow similar to, I don't know, like the first Jurassic Park, where the company actually tries to control the robots so that they cannot reproduce themselves. So they cannot reproduce themselves. There is the factory making the robots because they want to have the monopoly over the robots. But when the secret of how to actually manufacture robots is lost, then, well, there is probably no way to make more robots. So the situation is that, okay, so in like, I don't know what's their lifespan, like 20 years, 40 years, like there will be no robots because they will just die and no new robots will be made. And just everybody will be dead, and that's the end.
They didn't mention how the robots die. They mentioned it's about 20 years lifespan, but they didn't say if they age or if they just like plop to the floor. I don't.
So they're very so it's they're biological. So I guess they would just age and die. Why not?
Why not?
There isn't any talking about, I don't know, like bypassing aging. So I don't know. There would be another even greater invention probably. But then again, like I don't know if there is a discussion in it, but there is definitely this idea that, okay, for the company, they develop whatever makes sense for them commercially. So definitely it doesn't make sense for them to create robots that last forever, because you need to sell more robots. Yeah. So you need robots to break down so that you can sell new ones. So yeah, that's like the spirit of the company, definitely.
So the final plot point is that they start forcing Alquist to dissect and operate on robots so they could find how they work, and that's how he would find to progress with the research, but he doesn't want to do it. And then his final kind of act is he pretends he would cut up a robot that is clearly in love with another robot. And vice versa, he pretends in front of one of the partners to kill them so that the other robot would freak out and show that they actually do care about each other, and that's something new that hasn't happened with robots yet. And that's the hope and hopefully future of I want to say mankind, robots kind.
So in the end, like, I guess he again turns around, like he still tries to search for people, if there are some more people that the humanity could survive, and they just realize, okay, he's the only person left. So then he kind of decides, okay, so if there cannot be people, so let there at least be robots. So this is like his inner motivation to actually figure out, okay, how can we still keep at least the robot kind alive? And then like the end, which is a bit, I don't know, like mystic, I would say, is okay. So the robots were kind of incapable of love, but then these two robots they found love, so it just interpreted that okay, there is some hope and maybe they reproduce anyway, even though they cannot.
So open-ended, so you can hope that they can reproduce finally.
Yeah, so it's like in the Jurassic Park, the idea that nature finds a way. So
that's very hopeful.
Yeah. So if you want a happy ending, you can have it.
Is it though? Is it just completely replaced? So yeah, I guess.
That depends on how much you like humans. So if you think that all humans dying out is a good thing or a bad thing. But,
it definitely feels like we are working very hard to be replaced by ourselves, like by production. Yeah, I don't know how I feel about that. It's a whole question. But yeah, very poignant, very to the point, very entertaining. I can imagine at the time in 1920s, it must have been mind-blowing to watch this in the theater. Like, can you imagine like what kind of entertainment you would have at the time as far as imaginary worlds and concepts go?
Yeah, so I guess for me it's hard to see from today's point, because 100 years ago, and I'm not like a literary historian or anything. But I would guess that there are a bunch of concepts that were pretty new in this work. So not only the concept of robots, well, okay, it's completely new, but still very fresh at this time, and then all these consequences that it thinks about, and like leading to this dystopian future, even though it didn't seem as a bad idea in the beginning. And so that's it goes pretty deep.
Yeah, it's wonderful and holds up super well. I wasn't put off by anything, even the language. It was very, very nice read. So highly recommend it, even if you're listening and quote unquote spoiling yourself. I think it's still very, very nice read.
It's still reading,
So we haven't said that Karel Capek has written many, many, many theater plays. I think my favorite has always been and always will be The War with the Newts, which is like a sci-fi story about sentient newts that wage war with humankind.
Yeah.
And
it's also sort of dystopian, so it's so if you like R.U.R, you will probably also like The War with the Newts. Now, The War with the Newts isn't originally a theater play, so it has been made into theater plays.
I read it as a comic book as a child, and I was very happy about it.
Like the Newts, like it's a weird format.
It's like radio transmissions, right? Like between.
So it's like composition of various pieces. So like the middle part of the War with the Newts, I think it's like cutouts from newspapers, and it's like cutouts from newspapers in which we kind of see what's happening.
Also very original for the time.
Pretty experimental, yeah. But of course, like this is the time when a lot of modern literature ideas started. So yeah, but like Capek, it's still pretty conservative in the sense that you can really read it, and it's like readable and stuff. So it's not too experimental. That's good. But the ideas in it are very fresh and new for the time. But yeah.
Hopefully to be continued. We'll see if we read some more stuff on this podcast. But before I let you go, I have like lots of questions about stuff, but I don't really know which to talk about. I guess I'll just ask two, and if you want to talk about anything else. I honestly don't want to bore you because you talk about it constantly, so it has to be boring by now. It's like the same questions, right? Everybody's like, what is this AI? What the hell? So
let's see. So you've always had like interesting and new questions. So let's see.
These questions are not very interesting. It's more, I think you have more insight than any of us listening and speaking. So I would be curious, what makes you disappointed or kind of concerned? So what I mean is, based on what you've seen with the progress of language models and machine learning, what are the limits that make you disappointed? And what do you think is like the downside of it the most? Like for me, for example, what I've heard about recently was overtraining and diminishing returns. So if you overtrain a model, it starts to be much, much, much worse, which was a funny thing to me. So are there things like that we usually don't talk about? Is there something you're kind of disappointed that you find out about?
Yeah, like disappointed, like it depends on what you see as the end goal. So whether you're kind of techno-optimist, and there you see like technical challenges to overcome. So yeah, there is a lot of them. Or whether you you are like Capek and you're thinking in the broad terms, and you're maybe not interested in the technical development itself. Like actually Capek said that he wasn't interested in the robots. He was interested in the humans there. So it's a story about humans and not about robots. So in this case, the disappointing things might be that even 100 years later, we still haven't learned anything, and we're just going in the direction that Capek forecasted. Let's just try to improve everything, automate everything, and not think twice about anything. And like it wasn't written as guidelines on how we should proceed with the development, right? It was a warning, but
I mean it mostly personally to you, because you are very excited about this. You've always been very excited about this, so I'm sure you have some opinions about what you personally feel is not as it should.
So what I'm trying to do in my research is basically to open up the field to other fields, so that talking about it's not a technical question anymore. We should talk to people from humanities and figure out what we should be doing actually. So that's in the big picture, but then like in the technical picture, so there is still a lot of things we cannot do. So if we have good data to learn from, then we can do anything, but we actually in principle cannot have good data nearly for anything, because you always have good data for things that are common, that are frequent, but if something is not very frequent, then it just won't be frequent enough in the data, which means the systems cannot learn it. And like that's a property of the world, probably, that there is a small number of the frequent things and then the long tail of the infrequent things. So it's hard to cover. Like of course, like the systems try to generalize and to abstract to unseen things, but in principle, people can probably still do it better. So we're good at automating things that are just the repetitive same thing all time. That's easy to automate, but when there is something new, like humans are definitely much better in coping with the new situation. So and we don't know how they do it, like how we do it. There's, for example, with robotics now we have the autonomous vehicles, which is probably a very popular topic, and suddenly these theoretical questions come to life, like, okay, what should the vehicle do in this situation, that situation?
I've heard about this.
But in principle, it just decides based on what it has been trained on. So the really problematic cases is when there are like several unlikely things that happen at once. So yeah, like usually when you train the car, so usually it's nice weather and it's during the day, and you can see perfectly everything and not much is going on, and you're just going straight on. So that's not hard for the vehicles, but then if it's the night and it's raining and there is some wind, and then something unexpected is there, like, I don't know, on the left there is a horse and on the right there is a giraffe, so it probably hasn't happened in the past, so the car doesn't know what to do. So it's just very unlikely, very improbable, but okay, if you're a human, well, okay, new situation, but you do something. And if you're a car, well, I don't know.
Absolutely.
So that's a technical limitation of the machine learning we have. So we learn from the data, so we can do things that are frequent in the data.
Very, very specific data. Yeah. So that's optimistic, not as replaceable, hopefully.
Yeah. Like we don't know why we cannot automate this part. So maybe it's just something waiting for a scientific breakthrough, and we figure out, okay, that's how humans are creative, so this is how to automate it, but we really have no clue. So
So the other obvious question is what you're hopeful about and what you want to see in the future, but we already kind of talked about it and we know, so we don't have to talk about that. So that means that ask a completely nonsensical question that I was very curious about what you think, and we already kind of talked about this maybe 5 years ago. And I think you kind of felt like I'm like going crazy. So let's do it again 5 years later. I just gotta say a bunch of stuff. I don't really know how to say it simply. So for example, do you have a voice in your head if you read something? if you have to say yes or no.
Yeah, usually
Yes, right.
Yeah.
So if you think about something, does it happen in language? Like, would you consider it, like, if you're planning your day, do you think that you usually like kind of talk to yourself about it?
Yeah, I think it's mostly language. I think it's like we would say in technical terms, we would say multimodal. So it's multiple modalities. So there is like language and there is images and there is feelings or whatever. But I would say, it's nearly always like language is part of it. Yes.
Do you imagine things while you do this? Like, do you imagine a shape or a feeling or like an object when you plan the day? Like, you know what I mean? Like, if you read a book, do you see the things or do you not see the things?
Yeah, usually yes. Yes.
So these are like questions people have, right? They have like, do you have this voice? Do you have this thing? Can you imagine? Can you never imagine? And then when you first started talking about all these models and how language works and how you can predict all these words that will happen next statistically and all that, we were talking about like compressing information into a model. And you can like compress all the data into something that just takes in an input and just gets an output and it looks like you're speaking. Do you ever think about this in connection to yourself? Like that you're the same process in your head, you know? Like I always have this stupid thought when I work with AI that I ask it to do something. Like I use it at work currently every day basically. I am too lazy to write code, so I write like the instructions to write the code, and then I take the code and I rewrite the code. Like it's faster than to just do it from scratch. And sometimes I rewrite the code and it's worse than than the original code. And I have a very stupid thought, and I'm like, am I the worst processing model here than the other model? And that's fine when it comes to writing code, but when it comes to, like, let's say, plan your day or think about what you want, sometimes it's very difficult. And you like have this process in your head and you get some inputs, and the inputs can be very confusing and they can be very mismatched and they can be all over the place. And then you have some kind of output, and the output is basically a feeling usually, and you have some kind of urge to do something. And I feel like it's like a messed up compression language model that compressed all the information I have nothing to go on about, and then there is some kind of random result that I have to give because I have to have an output, and I have this stupid thought that it's like a combination of different compression language models that just somehow happened in my brain, and then I have this result, but there isn't anything me about it. It's just I have to do something about the information. You know what I mean? So that makes me feel very inferior because I feel like I'm doing exactly the same like the model, but very badly, and I don't care. So my question is, do you feel like that sometimes?
But I think definitely like that's part of it. I think it's hopefully not the whole thing that we as people are doing. But it depends. Like definitely, like I remember when I was, I don't know, talking to my grandmother, and she would talk about some rubbish which I don't care about, so I would kind of automatically reply something.
Exactly, I remember we had this discussion.
Completely as a language model. So just based on the previous context of the previous words, you say some probable next word, and totally, and your mind is wandering somewhere and I've seen people like test whether you're doing that, like when they're talking to you and they feel like you're just automatically replying. So say something surprising to wake you up, kind of. So
I feel like this is getting so much worse with things like TikTok. People are just like switching, not thinking.
So I've seen, for example, somebody do that when asking like, do you want a coffee? Yeah. Sugar, 2 pieces of sugar, sure. And milk, 2 pieces of milk. What? Like, does milk come in pieces or what? And so you try to confuse people and see like whether they're thinking or whether they're just a language model. But no, I think usually the difference, if you're actually doing something and it's not like these stupid things that you don't think about. So I think the difference is that if you have a language model, then the language model has the inputs and has the output, but doesn't have like some inner goal. Like typically you're not deciding randomly, okay, so now I could say this word or that word, so I can choose between them randomly and say this or that. Yeah, you can, but then you probably also have something inside. You actually want to say this word and not that word because you want to express something and not something else. So like if I ask you if you want to have a tea, so you could say yes and you could say no, and both of them are great answers. But maybe if you're not automated and you're thinking about it, so then you think about, okay, do I actually want tea or not? And based on that, you reply. So I think that's the human input in it, that you actually have some desires or something. But where do these come from, or how confused they are? Well, I don't know. But
come back to the is it the soul?
Yeah. So it might be that you actually wants something like
the soul that wants the tea. The sugar.
Like in evolutionary sense, you just want to live and have kids, and that's about what people are programmed to do. But we somehow observe that it's more complicated, probably. So yeah, so it means that there are some things that we want for some reason, and maybe we don't know why, but yeah, like some people want to have tea, and some people want to have coffee, and some people don't, and. Okay, so it's not random. Well, you can decide randomly, and I've met people where I think, yeah, they just randomly deciding without thinking what they really want. But typically, you want something or you don't want it, and this is how you guide yourself. And where it comes from, I don't know, but it exists.
So you'd say you feel more optimistic in this sense that there is something to that, to people that's more than just a sum of all those parts.
Yeah, maybe, or. Like, technically, I don't know if it's just another part which we just haven't recognized and described well enough. And in the end, it's a sum of parts, but we just don't understand some of the parts yet. Or whether there is really something which is not like a part that we could take into the sum, but there is something different. But, well, I don't know.
Yeah, that's a very, very good answer. Thank you.
Yeah, well, thank you. It was an interesting question.
I'll ask you in 5 years again.
yeah, let's see how we develop.
We keep having this discussion with my friend, and he always makes fun of me that I only see people as walking bone meal, like masokoski mochka in Czech. So yeah, so I guess you made me a little bit more optimistic that it's not just that.
Depends on what's the good result for you, like. Like maybe it's I don't know, freeing in a sense if you realize that you're just this meat and bone machine and you're just automated, and then it's like, okay, so it just happens automatically.
That's one way to think about it. Yes. Definitely power in people's thinking, in giving meaning to things, just to have them have meaning, if you know what I mean. Like the power to decide that something has meaning for you is something that is very alien to technological reasoning.
Yeah.
So I think that's something different maybe that we have.
Yeah, I definitely agree. Like we see it with anything that's like generated automatically, so people are great at assigning meaning to it even if there was no meaning. Yeah.
Okay. All right. Anyway, thanks so much for being here. It was great talking to you.
Yeah, thanks a lot. It was a pleasure. It was nice to talk about
so
that.
Catch up after a long time since we haven't talked.
Yeah, of course.
Good luck with your future endeavors. Maybe you'll build the actual machines next time that will actually use pens to write the play. And I'm not sure.
So let's see what happens in like next 5 years.
It's crazy. It's just 5 years that we talked about that. Seems like it's completely a different world.
Yeah. But yeah, like, and I'm in the field and still I feel the same, like, okay, it's everything happening so fast all at once. And yeah, it is like that.
Okay. So thanks again and see you on the next episode.
Thanks a lot. Yeah, sure.